Wilkins-Smith. I am a global trainer and systemic facilitator in systemic work and constellations. I train coaches and companies around the world. I also work with individuals, and I deliver a number of workshops around the world. I teach what I call emotional DNA and systemic work. And people ask me all the time, so what is emotional DNA? The quickest way to explain it to you is you understand that you inherit your blue eyes, your brown hair, your height, your weight, all of those good things. What you don't always stop to think about is you also can inherit things like the family depression, family anger, family struggle with money. These are pieces that we inherit as thoughts, emotions, feelings, actions, and they imprint on the system as strongly often as your physical DNA does. And this is quite well researched at this point. We notice that traumas are passed down, traits are passed down. You'll often hear somebody say, "Oh dear Lord, you're just like your great uncle so-and-so." When they say that, you want to pay attention. Go and have a look at what great uncle so-and-so did and how that's showing up for you. Because yes, we do take that on. So when I talk about teaching systemic work, what I'm talking about is in our systems, beginning with our family system, which is our primary pattern maker. In our systems, there are a number of what we call principles, in other words, guiding pieces that hold true. There are also what we call natural orders that hold true. And I teach those when I'm busy in workshops. But with those, understanding those pieces that hold true, the guidelines, the principles, you also begin to understand that we create patterns. And so patterns are created in your system when there's an event that happens that creates a reaction. And I want you to think about that for a bit. So you have an event, you have a reaction to the event. It could be good, it could be scary. And you immediately start to have thoughts about that. And guess what? Now you're having emotions about those thoughts too. And those emotions and thoughts are creating actions, which are creating more reactions. And now you're having more thoughts and more emotions. And before you know it, you're creating words and sentences around that too. Well, I'm never going to, I will always, I'm not going to, did you see, I could never. And suddenly we begin to create this whole library around the event. And this becomes a mindset. And the mindset then becomes your truth. And that's really important. It's not the truth, it's your truth. But you deal with it as though it were the truth. And the truth then begins to have its own set of laws, which says you can't, you shouldn't, you must, you mustn't. And so if we create those in a certain way, we begin to become limited in what we are and are not allowed to do in our world. And this even extends to your body. Oh, well, I can't do that, it'll hurt. I can't possibly, it's going to cause me some anguish. I should never peep out or be vocal because I could get hit. So we actually literally create our own worlds. And then we start to make what other people do in relationship to that also means something. So now we start talking or feeling or thinking about the ways we relate. So all of this, that whole piece that I've just described is your emotional DNA. And that is the foundation of a lot of this work. What do you do? Where do you come from? Why do you say what you say? Why are you limited in the ways that you are limited? And as we said at the beginning, is it really yours? Or, as I like to say to my students, are you eating somebody else's pizza? Nasty stuff to eat somebody else's pizza. It doesn't taste very good, frankly. But are you taking on a pattern that doesn't belong to you and doesn't serve you? Bearing in mind that some patterns really do serve you. So what we do when we have a workshop or an event is we show you how to walk into the middle of what has you stuck, how to truly experience it. And I know that sounds odd. You'll hear people who do this work talking about constellations. So I know whenever I say constellations, people go, "Oh, are you an astrologer?" No, I'm not an astrologer. A constellation in this context means a grouping of elements within a system. In other words, family members in a family system, and then in an organization, it could be customers, it could be associates. There are many aspects to an organizational system. So let's stick just for a moment to a family system. So it would be so helpful if all of these thoughts and meanings that you carry around in your head, if you could see them and interact with them and understand them and really kind of walk through what it does to you. And you're able to do that. In a constellation, we either use live representatives or sometimes what we call a floor anchor, which is an inanimate object, and we take one representative for each part of the issue that we're dealing with. So now instead of you trying to solve it here with your eyes closed and all squinched up, thinking about what this is and how it impacts you, you literally get to see it. You get to walk among it or amongst the components of it. You get to feel, and it's a visceral sense of what happens when this issue is in front of you. And because that's happening, all of the sentences and the feelings and the emotions that you have around this start to surface. And before you know it, very quickly, you can see the pattern in front of you. Now you're no longer trying to solve it here. It's literally in front of you. So with a good systemic guide or facilitator, we know to ask you the questions. What questions do we need to ask you about? So when did that begin? What did it look like? How did it feel? Do you notice that this has come down to you and it's 3 generations old? Does it still serve you? What might happen if? So now not only are you walking into your own family pattern, you're actually getting to interact with it. And so what we see is when people start to engage the different senses, when they can see it, hear it, feel it and touch it, sometimes even smell it or have a sense of what that was, you'll see that because those come together, there is a very visceral reaction of the system. Now it's no longer just a mental sense, it is an embodied sense of it. And when we look at it and we begin to ask ourselves, does this work? Does this serve? How might it change? Is it mine or does it belong to someone else? We begin to also ask ourselves, what more is possible here? And the minute we start to ask ourselves what's possible here, that history that we've been living can't stay the same. Because now we're looking at what more we might add, how we might shift. And instead of trying to do it here, we're engaging the head. Very often you'll actually see people say, oh, my heart, or they'll talk about being joyful, or they may cry because the heart is opening. And then they have a sense, which is the gut. So you're actually engaging head, heart, gut. And there is a shift that begins to happen. And now you will hear people say in an event like this, I don't want to do this anymore. I need to do it differently. And because they're standing in it, they don't just think I need to do it differently. They have a felt sense of, if I stand here or if I do this differently, this is what it may feel like. So now they're embodying not just the system, but the possibility. And you begin to see remarkable shifts. And these are shifts that will often happen rather quickly. Some may unfold over time, but in that moment, you've given your mind and so your thoughts have a possibility of changing. Your feelings may very well begin to change. What we often see is people will have a sense of, oh, this hurt, but oh my goodness, look what's possible. So they're changing as they're experiencing. And so in constellations, we also talk about 3D mapping. You literally get to stand in the issue and stand in the potential. Now you're standing in what's possible. And so a shift happens. I actually have a t-shirt that says, in this room, shift happens.
Mhm.
And that is a constellation. There is an entire process. It is simple enough for you to use and begin to understand what you're doing, and complex enough that once you begin to understand the language of systems, it can unravel the most entangled, highly intergenerational pieces that have seemed like they couldn't be resolved. Now, the interesting thing is, it also translates very well to organizational issues. And so when I do leadership in organizations, many organizations, big organizations, will ask me to come in when they've tried everything and they're stuck. And by using a similar process, where they're able to see the entire brain of the organization or the entire piece that has them stuck, and we're able to ask the questions and virtually interact with it, they will often report solving problems that they haven't been able to solve for years in a matter of hours, because they've now been able to literally interact with the components of that. So this is seen as a highly powerful tool and strategy in many companies. And it's delightful to watch the system show you what's there, and you be able to work with it to get to a different place. So that, in a nutshell, is both emotional and organizational DNA, and a description that I hope helps you, a description of constellations and what it can do for you.